We're going to start off. Ian Cosden is going to give us a quick introduction on USRSC. So if you aren't familiar with the group, you can learn a little bit about it right now. And then after that, we'll hear from Angela about Agile for research software.
Welcome, everyone. So my name is Ian Cousin. I'm currently the chair of the steering committee here at USRC, and I see lots of familiar names, but probably even more unfamiliar ones, which is exciting. So I just want to give a little quick overview about what USRC is, what we do, and obviously lots more opportunities to interact with the association. So what we are, we're a community-driven organization, grassroots. We started off just as a group of people who were interested in connecting, and our members largely fall into one of three categories. So either RCs themselves, so that's people writing, contributing to research software, regardless of where you are. This isn't just an academic endeavor. It's labs, private industry, and more. Maybe people interested in RSE career. So whether it be students, researchers interested in transitioning to something with research software engineer, or software engineers interested in transitioning over to research. Those identifying as RSE allies, so those that manage, sponsor, support RSEs, but maybe aren't necessarily RSEs themselves. We're very inclusive. We encourage everyone who's kind of interested or aligns with our mission. So roughly a four-pronged mission we're looking at trying to create a community of professionals who share things, knowledge, connections, resources, advocating on behalf of research software engineers. So the increasingly important impact on research that RSEs bring. Providing resources, so whether that's training material, not unlike this talk today, but also supporting individuals or groups that are trying to get started, providing easy access to resources that help in the career and development of this profession. And last but certainly not least is actively promoting and encouraging diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just within our community, but within the larger profession as a whole. We got people all over. We're not just exclusive to US. Obviously, that's where most of the people are. This started in early 2018, and after a little while of not much happening, has started growing and growing and growing. We welcome everyone. You can even see on this map here, there's some local and regional groups that are starting to form and that we encourage and support. So what's going on? We've got a website that probably most of you have stumbled on at this point. Newsletters, if you join, you sign up, you get a newsletter. Most of the interactions happen on Slack. So when you sign up, you get an invitation to Slack Workspace, lots of channels on lots of different topics. We openly encourage you to set up new channels. Look there, Twitter, syndicated blog and podcast, a job board. I looked today, this screenshot's old, but we have 30 active RC jobs and some more related ones on there. Lots of different events, so virtual workshops, annual general meeting coming up, a career symposium. You can get lots of these on the YouTube channel. A speaker series like this one, a DEI speaker series as well, a funder speaker series. We have monthly community calls on a range of topics, and in-person and virtual conference workshops, panels, BOFs, outreach to spread the word about what research software engineers do. Lots of ways to get involved within the community. There's too many to list at this point, which is exciting. You can find them here. Look through on Slack. These are the Slack channels where you can join in the discussion and interact on topics ranging from DEI or national labs. We're working together to try to elevate research software engineers within the community. Some events to put on your calendar, take a look next week. So this is kind of closed at this point, but there'll be we're teaming up with the Academic Data Science Alliance to look at creating a guidebook for RC and data scientist career paths within academia. There'll be a workshop at SC22, our AGM via Zoom. But maybe most excitingly, there will be a conference next year in Chicago, our first ever USRC conference. Stay tuned for more both volunteer opportunities and information about what that's going to look like, and lots of upcoming virtual events from the community calls to the speaker series. So with that, I'll say it's free to join, free to sign up. You can lurk, lurkers are welcome, or get involved in something that you're interested in. And with that, I will stop my share and hand it over to Jamil, who will introduce our speaker. Jamil, over to you.
So thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. I see we have about 130 people now, so woo. I'd like to introduce Angela Helling. She is the group leader of the Continuing Model and Numerical Methods Group, XCP4 at Los Alamos National Lab. And I'm assuming, I can't figure out what the X stands for, but that's computational physics. Her technical experience is mainly in software engineering and multidisciplinary research. And of course, her talk today is about how she adapted the Agile process, which is commonly used in industry, to help her move forward in her research career, and how some tips and tricks for how to incorporate Scrum into research software development teams. So with that, I'll hand this off to Angela.
All right, so thank you for the introduction. I am going to talk about my favorite topic today, which is how to modify Agile processes, especially Scrum, to do science, which is what I do. So I am from Los Alamos National Laboratory. If you're not familiar with Los Alamos, our main job is to ensure the safety of the nuclear weapons stockpile for the United States. And to do that, we need to do a lot of multidisciplinary science. So everything we do is a very multidisciplinary across cut. It takes engineers, physicists, computer scientists, data scientists, machine learning, software engineers, anything you can think of, we really need a cross cut. So when you think about a mission like that, that has this really overarching multidisciplinary bent to it, we have to think about a whole different way to manage and to deal with it. I was first introduced to Scrum kind of in its industry form. Now it's been about 13 years. And ever since then, I've been tweaking it to work in a scientific environment. So why should scientists like Scrum? It's easy. We're egotistical. We like to control our destiny. And my firm belief is that you can control yourself best when you plan. Research is super unpredictable. So lots of people would say that's a good argument to not use Scrum, because Scrum kind of relies on incremental development in a predictable way. But it also relies on replanning. And so I think it's a great fit for science. So it also encourages collaboration. When you're working in a big multidisciplinary team, having these touch points that are built into a Scrum process for communication can really make all the introverted scientists, which is most of us, really talk to each other and think about how our work fits together. Scrum is lean. Like, you do not have to put, so my firm belief is that you can take the parts of Scrum and you can slim Scrum down to make it a very efficient management structure. And that's what we're going to talk about. And the process, it should not be prescriptive. It is something that you will develop as a leader over time with your teams. So being a slave to a particular way of thinking or a particular way of doing things is really not what we're going for here. But I think Scrum is a great starting place to manage this kind of a team. So I'm going to start by giving some background about Scrum. If you haven't heard of it, I'm going to do that. And then we're going to move on to an open discussion. And I hope you guys will be thinking about questions as we go through it, because my goal is not to talk at you, but to talk with you. So Scrum, what is Scrum? Scrum is an Agile process. It's one of the most popular Agile processes. And it really relies on the idea of iterative development of working software. Priorities are set and they're allowed to change in industry by the business needs, in research by the research needs. And most people work in iterations of about 2 weeks to a month. So Scrum has been used everywhere. It's been used by industry. It has been used to develop medical equipment and, spaceships and anything you can think of. Somebody's used Scrum for it. So what are some of the key characteristics? So the number one key characteristic that I think makes it great for science is that we start with self-organizing teams. We're going to talk about that, but I think that this is something that particularly appeals to scientists because we're independent, we're used to thinking for ourselves, and we really don't like hierarchy. And I think that Scrum gives us a real opportunity to hear everybody in a pretty flat hierarchy, and that's very nice. So the product progresses in a series of 1 to 4 week sprints. You capture requirements in a backlog. There's no specific engineering practices. That means you don't have to pair program. That means you don't have to use certain tools, right? And the main goal is to get it to be a self-sustaining process so that, you know, and a self-improving process. So you do an iteration, you talk about how to improve in the next iteration, and then you repeat the process. And every time you're getting a little better at the process. So here's the overview. This is a picture, and then we're going to kind of go through what some of this terminology is for folks who might not have heard it. So there are some Scrum artifacts that are important, a product backlog, which is basically a list of things that are needed for the product you're developing, a sprint backlog, which is the stuff you're working on right now. The daily Scrum meeting is where we all touch bases as a team. The sprint is this 2 to 4 week iteration here. And then the potentially shippable product increment is what you're hoping to have at the end of the sprint. So a sprint. I've already touched a little bit on this. A sprint is the unit of time in which a Scrum team works. Typical durations 2 to 4 weeks, because people always ask me, what do? I usually do 3 weeks. Keeping it constant leads to a good rhythm. You kind of learn as a team how to pace yourselves if you keep a pretty constant cadence. In a sprint, one piece of a product is designed, coded, and tested. So this isn't waterfall, right? The difference in Scrum is that we don't do things one thing at a time. We do a little bit of it all the time. So for instance, if you're starting a new product, the first step might be just to do the API design for that product. I once asked the team to write me a skeleton code in a sprint, and all that code had was the API. And then at the demo, when they went to demo it for me, it printed an ASCII art skeleton, right? And that was a complete, potentially shippable increment, right? Nobody wanted our skeleton ASCII art, but it showed that it worked. It had tests. Those tests printed something, did something, and the API was there. So Scrum teams really focus on doing the whole end-to-end process all the time and then adding to it, rather than trying to do all the requirements, then all the testing, all the API development, whatever. You don't try to do it in this sequence. Okay, something else special about a sprint. We don't make any changes to our plans during a sprint. So if you have a sprint going, it gives people some certainty about what they're working on. And so it's important as a leader that you plan to stay on track with that for the whole sprint. And there's a whole conversation that we can have about if something really comes up, you cancel a sprint and start over. But the idea is that you maintain the same goals and objectives for the whole sprint, and you don't let somebody come in and, you know, tip over the apple cart. So the Scrum framework basically has 3 pieces. It's got roles, ceremonies, and artifacts, and we're going to go through and talk about each of those. So the product owner gets to define features of the project. So this is the person, this is the boss, right? And in industry, this is the boss. This is the person that is responsible for the customer. So they're the customer advocate or the customer themselves. They're responsible for profitability. They get to prioritize features. This is different, of course, in science, and we'll touch on that in a minute. The Scrum Master. The Scrum Master is the team's advocate. Scrum Master organizes the team and helps the team organize, and they help the team speak up to the product owner. They're the interface with the product owner, and they do things like removing issues that the team might find They are often viewed as a servant leader, and that's a good way to think about it. This is a service role. The Scrum Master is not above. They're an advocate for the team. So the team, this is really important. The team is cross-functional. It's usually 5 to 9 people. I have seen people use Scrum with bigger teams. It's really pretty hard. 5 to 9 is kind of the sweet spot. So the members should be full-time. I'm just gonna throw out where I'm gonna come back to this. I don't always agree with that, and I think that's not practical in a research environment. But the teams are self-organizing. So we try to keep titles out of things, and we try to make sure everybody feels valued inside of a team. Team membership should only change between sprints. So now we'll talk a little bit about the ceremonies. So there are 4 ceremonies that are associated with Scrum. And the first one we're going to talk about is the sprint planning meeting. So this is where you set your goals for the sprint. So in the industry version, the product owner will set some goals like, I need widget A, and that's my top priority. So can you please plan a sprint to complete widget A? So at that meeting, at the sprint planning meeting, the team will attend and the Scrum Master, and they will talk about how to get to that goal. So they will analyze and evaluate the product backlog after the product owner has prioritized the backlog. They'll say, hey, we can get widget A done, and we can also get widget B done in this sprint. And so that's the time for the team to make a real plan. And then once they have decided the goal, then they decide what are the tasks that are needed to achieve such a goal. So it's really important at the sprint planning that the team is really thinking big picture about what it is that they need to get done during this sprint. So they not only want to make widget A and widget B, but they want to figure out how it fits into their whole widget system. And so it's really important not to get bogged down into, I really want this one thing, but I want this one thing, and how is it going to play with everything else? So this is a very collaborative meeting, depending on how close to full-time your team is, and depending on how detailed you want to get, these meetings can run up to half a day. For me, they run 2 hours for my teams, and so we do this once every 3 weeks. So let's see. Next, we'll talk about the product backlog. So in the product backlog, it's the requirements. This thing is managed by the product owner, and they help organize everything that's going on inside the project. So they're supposed to tell you that widget A is more important than widget B, which is more important than widget C, and they're supposed to express it so that you can really tell what they mean. And it can be reprioritized at the start of every sprint. So here's what a product backlog might look like for a hotel reservation system. There are lots of items on this list, and they have to have, so they're in priority order. So allow a guest to make a reservation. That makes a lot of sense to be first. And yes, it makes sense that canceling a reservation comes after making a reservation. Or change a date of a reservation might come after being able to make a reservation. So you can see how somebody has gone through and they've prioritized this. And then they've provided some base estimates of how long they think that might take. So talking about a sprint goal, I touched on this already, where we said, okay, it's our goal of what we're going to accomplish inside the sprint. So if we were doing a database application, we might say, make the application run on SQL Server. Or for life sciences, we might want to support features necessary for population genetics. So the idea is to say, hey, you know, this is the big picture goal of what we want to do. And then the team can start thinking about what are the individual tasks that humans might do that would further this goal. So the sprint backlog is developed at the at the sprint planning meeting. And at the sprint planning meeting, individuals sign up for work of their own choosing. So for me, this is where some of the magic is in Scrum. So if I've laid out tasks as a team, or if the team has laid out tasks, we've laid out priorities, we've set our sprint goal, we've laid out tasks, and we have now a bunch of tasks. People can look at those tasks and decide what they want to take. And for me and for the environment I work in, it's really important that we don't get one deep in any area. So I always tell my teams, please take tasks that we're expecting you to take, right? But then take one you don't know how to do and ask a friend to help you. It's really important to me to get some cross training in there, and it's a quick and easy way to do it. If I tell somebody to take a task every sprint that they don't know how to do and work with a colleague, you know, pretty soon we have some cross-trained team members. And I want to be clear, if I have a data scientist and they take a GUI development task, it doesn't mean that suddenly the data scientist is expert at GUI development. It just means they have some familiarity with it now. And if we need to debug something quick, maybe they have a minute and the GUI developer doesn't. Or maybe the fields are more closely related and you're talking about an applied mathematician picking up maybe a new numerical method from another colleague, right, that they don't know much about. And so it's a great opportunity as a leader to encourage people to really collaborate as we go through this. And it comes out pretty naturally when you do it this way. So here's the idea for the sprint backlog. So going back to our hotel example, you might need to code the user interface, you might need to code the middle tier, test it, write some online help, and write another class that you're going to need later. And then you can talk about some estimates. Personally, I don't use estimates at this level, but in industry, estimates for numbers of hours that they expect to spend on things are really important, and they help them measure like ROI and things like that, which are less common in the scientific environment. So speaking of, you can use a burn down chart. So if you start with estimates, so during the sprint planning meeting, another piece that I didn't discuss was that we do some rough estimates of how long we think things will take. And whether we estimate in hours or another unit, we can track over the sprint how we're progressing through the sprint and how much work is getting done. So the ideal here is that we start with 800 hours of work, and then we end up with 0 hours of work by the end of the sprint, right? So looking at a sprint burn down chart can give you a hint about how your team is working and how effective they're being. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about, the daily Scrum meeting. So the daily Scrum meeting is a really critical part of what we do. It is a stand-up meeting. For my teams, it can be on the phone or on Zoom. And it is a strict 15-minute meeting. It's not for problem solving, and only team members, Scrum Master and Product Owner can come. The idea of a Scrum is to make sure that your team is connecting on a regular basis, especially if they are either spread out geographically. For instance, most of my teams work on site here, but they're spread out over the site, and so it can be a long walk to get to each other's offices. And it's a good place where people know that they can find one another. So in the Scrum meeting, we say, what did we do yesterday? What's our plan for today? And is anything holding up your work? That's a really important thing. And it's not a status member, it's not a status check for the Scrum Master. It's for you. It's for you and your peers to be talking about, oh, today I need to talk with Danny about this, or, you know, my update can be, I was really stuck on this thing yesterday because I needed an authority I didn't have, or something like that. So the next ceremony is the sprint demo. So during the sprint demo, teams present what they have accomplished during the sprint. And this is an informal meeting. I have a no slides rule. And they have here a 2-hour prep time rule. I have like a 10-minute prep time rule. At my sprint demos, we do things like show code, we show pull requests in progress, we show tests that are running, any demos we have, results we have related to the work that we've done in the sprint. And my team kind of has a two-tiered notion of a sprint review. So we have kind of an internal sprint review where most of our sprints, it's just for ourselves and it's extremely informal. And then every so often, we'll invite more people to it and we will have a more formal sprint demo so people can see the software we've been working on. So the sprint retrospective, after every sprint, we take a little bit of time to do a sprint retrospective. So we want to take, so I told you that Scrum is an iterative process. It's something that you really want to improve. And so what we really want to do is take a look at what is and is not working every sprint. So these things don't have to last a real long time. Mine usually lasts about 30 minutes. And the whole team gets to participate. Here's an example of a really simple retrospective. The whole team talks about what they want to start doing, what they want to stop doing, and what they'd like to continue doing. And there's a million formulas for sprint retrospective. And I'll touch on my own favorite a little bit later. So that was a really whirlwind overview of Scrum. And I know you're wondering, you know, what it is, how could I possibly do this in my own environment? I hinted before that the Agile community can be very prescriptive at times and want to do things a very specific way. But I don't think that the beauty of this is in the exact implementation of it. It's in how much it helps you and your team. So changes that I've made to be in my research environment is that I allow part-time staff. I allow dual-hatted roles, and I allow Scrum Master to be a team member or a product owner. And let's talk about that for a minute. I know some of you do science, I know I do, and you know, how many times do you think a grant funder would give you a product owner, right? So somebody has to be that product owner, that's usually the PI. The roles I tend to merge are product owner and Scrum Master. And that can be a little bit of a conflict of interest for people. Because if you're the customer advocate and the team advocate, maybe your interests are in tension. But truthfully, in science, that's a lot of times the way it's done. In my own experience, it's possible to separate your desire to help your team and advocate from your team from the desire to advocate for the customer. You know, your mileage may vary. So I don't track per task labor in the hours. My team tracks roughly small, medium, large tasks. We don't try to say, oh, that took 200 hours or something like that, because research by its nature is unpredictable. So the idea that if I know that some research problem took me 200 hours to solve doesn't mean my next research problem is going to take me 200 hours to solve. It means that one could take 2 hours or 400 hours. So I definitely have a less than 20-minute prep time for our sprint demo, and my team sets the goals and priorities. So that's a big twist for me, is that, you know, we have projects here that last generally about a year. And so at the beginning of the year, we have some yearly goals that we set. And then my team helps me decide what order to achieve those goals in to finish the year. And so at my sprint planning meetings, as I've alluded to, we spend time talking about our sprint goals, what our sprint goals should be, and how they fit into the yearly goals that we're trying to achieve, and even the longer term goals. And so it really cuts down on prep time for the leaders, and it actually really engages the team a lot. So I really do muddy the waters a lot with the roles, but I keep all the ceremonies. Like, I find it so useful to have that time to plan a sprint with my team. Those meetings are the best meetings that we have. The sprint review is really important. It gives people a chance to show off their work. They can talk about it, they can feel good about what they did, and they can be accountable of their peers. The retrospective is absolutely critical because you need to know what's going right and wrong with your team. I don't know about you guys, but as a PI, I don't manage my people. I don't micromanage them. I can't spend every day checking in on them. And so when I get to that retrospective, it's a cue for me to stop and listen to what people are saying their issues are. The daily scrum. I do not have daily scrums. I have twice a week scrums because my teams are only part-time, and so I don't want it to be a big burden on them. And the twist that I do is that I have one in person and then one that is on the phone so that people can call in. And the reason I like to have an in-person one is because a lot of times people will use the scrum meeting as a jumping off point for meetings, follow-on meetings afterwards. And so the scrum will be over in 10 minutes, and then people will break off into little smaller groups to go and work on something that they're collaborating on. I also use the product backlog and the sprint backlog. The burn down charts for me are hit and miss. I don't always use those because we don't track them as much. It's pretty hard when you have a part-time team to see a steady burn on a burn down chart. And so for me, that's kind of a rough overview of what I do. So what are the things, if you're modifying the Scrum process, I said that for me, this has evolved over 13 years of working. What is it that guides my thinking when I'm making a change? So the key for me is self-organizing and collaborative teams with a flat hierarchy, and the team gets to manage the process. I don't have work, never assigned, and people don't own code. That is a big deal. So the goal for me is to really have a team that's very collaborative and very cross-cutting. So we spend time watching out for each other. At the end of our sprint plannings, we review the tasking and make sure that people didn't take too much. Hey, if you're only working 30%, why did you take 25 tasks? That's too many. Put some back. Stop being a task hog. And we make sure that we take some time to appreciate one another. So other principles that are important: keep your work in these iterations. Don't allow that change to happen during a sprint, and make sure you're checking in with each other often, showing off your work, and that you do the retrospective. So for me, this is all tools that I use to build a collaborative and flexible team. So some specific fun things that I do with my sprints: we name our sprints. We do alphabetical names with a fun naming scheme: AA, BB, CC, or AB, BC, CD. So some of the fun naming schemes that we've done in the past are fantasy plus sci-fi. So we had Tolkien Tribbles. We had Nearly Headless Nick Fury. So we have a lot of fun, and those things can seem very superfluous, but they really build a team identity and team ownership. And it is definitely bonus points if you can get some upper management to talk about what's going on in Vindictive Weevil. I'm just saying. So another thing I like to do for team building purposes, because I do have a team that is pretty widely dispersed throughout our site and even a couple of virtual members now, we like to have tea time, and tea time is just a hangout time for us. So we can come in with no agenda. We have a room, it has tea and snacks, it has a huge monitor that we can work together on, look at pull requests together. It's a free-form meeting. It's got whiteboards and markers, right? Scientists, so we need that space to talk. And so what I find is that people come in, they're talking about their kids, their pets, their hobbies. What did they do last weekend? What are they doing this weekend? And then the next thing you know, they're neck deep in equations on the whiteboard, right? So this time is really important when you have a team that's kind of dispersed throughout the site. So in traditional Scrum, you would be co-located with your team, and you guys would all be full-time together, but that never happens, right? And so we need, in science anyway, and so we need to have these times to connect with each other. My big point on this is don't be tempted to structure this meeting. Let it happen. And if some days all people want to talk about is their weekend, let it go. Those are great things that make people trust each other. They help people know each other. And when your team encounters conflict, it makes them more resilient. Retrospectives. I've hinted at this a couple times. Do not skip a retrospective. Retrospectives are super important. My favorite retrospective is a simple one. It's just what went well during this sprint, what did not go well during this sprint, and how will we fix the things that didn't go well. And some of them we can't fix. Retrospectives I've been in, people shout out everything from, I delivered widget A to I finally took my kids to Disneyland after COVID, right? It can be any of those things. And when we celebrate together like that, again, that's another moment of bonding for our teams. When we're talking about things that didn't go well, we have to be very careful. The leader has to be the grown-up in this, right? It's fine to allow people to vent. I do not allow my teams to, abuse other people. I don't let them rant for too long. I try to get them to stick to technical difficulties. And if we are having people difficulties, then we talk about what it is we would do to smooth those over. So you don't want your team to become, insular or bitter towards other people. And so you have to be very careful. And so that's why I say, remember the golden rule, right? Don't be talking bad about your colleagues. These are people that you have to work with day in and day out. Don't let your team get too wrapped up in politics. Try to keep them on an even keel. Finally, at the end of a retrospective, be sure and appreciate your colleagues. So I have to give credit to my friend Jerry Weinberg, who introduced this concept to me. He had this way of ending a meeting where he would say, I appreciate you, for Angela, for helping debug this feature. And we go around the room at the end of every sprint. It's very cheesy. My teams have attempted to rebel against this multiple times. It is not something that I allow them to rebel against because it is so important to stop and think about who helped me in this sprint. It reminds me that I belong in a bigger context than just myself, and it helps me to connect to all my colleagues. And so it's just really an important and really motivating moment. And it's very satisfying when somebody does call you out and says, oh, I really appreciate you, because you think, oh, nobody saw me take on this horrible task that was miserable for me. So it's really important. So I'm going to wrap up here, and I'm going to open up the discussion. I would like questions in the chat, please, and I'm hoping somebody will moderate. Is that good?
Yes, thank you, Angela. We did have one question, kind of more of a business question. Will the slides be available after the fact?
I can certainly make them available. I think you have them and you are free to share them.
I do. Excellent. Great. So we'll post them somewhere. We have a few questions. We have a bunch of questions popping up in the chat.
Fabulous. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah. So Aristana has a question. How do you manage urgent needs that come up halfway through the sprint?
So if urgent needs come up through the sprint, they're in two categories. They're urgent needs that are really urgent, or urgent needs that are not so urgent and somebody's telling you they are. And as a Scrum Master, you have to make the call. If it is really, really urgent, the proper procedure is to cancel the sprint and replan around the new urgent need. Now, if you're talking about an urgent need that's a couple of hours, that's very different than a big urgent need, but I'm talking about a big urgent need.
Wow. We have a lot of questions.
Yeah, I'm making a list of the questions to help out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so And feel free, if I'm answering your question, you can just talk straight to me if you need to. So you could just call on people on if you want to.
Yeah, sure. I guess I'll go in order. Michelle, do you want to unmute and ask your question? Michelle Fabry? Or I can ask it for you if you prefer. Okay, I'll ask. So in my previous life as a contract software engineer, we had decently clear way of determining priorities for sprints. The client talks to the project manager to tell them what they want. The project manager determines what the client actually needs. The project manager conveys info to the developers, and the developers determine how to turn that into reality. Without a management hierarchy or a clear source of where the money is coming from, who really gets the final say on what the MVP is?
So I believe that in science, and I am speaking really to science and the way that most projects are kind of PI'd by a scientist who wrote a proposal and got some funds, it's the PI that gets the call, right? Because they're on the hook to deliver for that customer. And so if the PI is saying no, then the team has to go with what they're saying, because they're providing the funding, and it's largely their reputation on the line. Does that help?
Yes, it looks like that helps. Let's see.
And the next one is with Jordan Peel Sowell.
Yeah, thanks. And I think I'll combine this with the sentiment of John's question a little further down. So my question is basically, what is the minimum percentage of time that a team member, a scrum master, or a product owner can have to be a successful member of the team? And merging with John's question, I agree with John that I rarely have 5 to 9 people working on a project. So along with smaller percentage of time, how does this scale to smaller numbers of people on a team? And thank you for the talk.
Oh, sure. So the percentage of time for me, if I don't have somebody, so I like to have people about 40%. I don't have all my team about 40%. I have kind of tiers of involvement in my teams, where if I have somebody at 20%, it's because they're a consultant, or because they or have a specialized skill. Let's say a GUI developer, I might need them 1 day a week, and that could work. If I have somebody less than that, they are a real consultant. Like we have a scientist who is preeminent in this field, and we have him for 10% of his time. And you think, what could he possibly do on that time? And he's only a consultant. So I find ways to use people's time from 10% up to 100% of their time. As far as a product owner, again, I tend to roll together product owner and scrum master, and that's kind of the PI role. And that can be actually really lightweight. You can do that job if you're clever in 20% time. It really depends, but the way that I manage my teams is that when we plan our tasks, we take the tasks that can fit in the time we have. And if we have somebody who's only available towards the end of the sprint, we make sure that what they have doesn't depend on something that happens earlier in the sprint, so that we time things correctly for having them. Now, as far as number of people, I have not had this work well for less than about 3 people. 3 is pushing it, 4 is best, and it can get kind of tricky when you're dealing with 4 part-time people. You certainly, in a smaller group, there's some advantages. You could organize yourself, you could plan this way. It might not make as much sense to go with this much overhead for such a tiny team. I don't know. Is there something specific I can answer there? I feel like I could do better on that.
I feel like you answered my question, but John Geyer, if you'd like to take it, because that was your question also.
Yeah, thank you, Jordan. So yeah, I'm frequently and I asked a follow-on question to that. We've got a management culture that we're maybe starting to escape a little bit, but where basically everybody was expected to be a PI of something. And so getting more than a couple of people together on a project is challenging. And so certainly to the overhead question, it seems like having formal product owners and scrum masters who aren't code writers definitely doesn't make any sense. But I'm wondering how much even of the artifacts and the rituals and so on make sense to carry down. And I, candidly, I asked somewhere in there, for, what if n's less than or equal to 3 or less than or equal to 1? I mean, oftentimes I'm doing stuff where it's very, very part-time and I'm the only one working on it. And at the most, I can maybe go ping some ideas off from people, but can't even get them involved in writing code because they've got their own efforts to work on. I'm just curious where.
So I think
if you've seen that work,
use,
and yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Pieces of this you can use even with a team of 1, right? Stopping and planning every 3 weeks is not a bad thing for anyone to do, right? Thinking about where you're going, and maybe that's your chance to bounce it off a colleague and use a consultant, right? So there's a way that you could do this, and you don't have to do it so formally, but you could be like, yeah, I'm going to do a 3-week cadence, and I'm going to reevaluate where I am, and if I think I'm moving along. So my thing is to take the pieces that are useful for you. And so to me, the first thing I would grab is that planning cadence, because the planning cadence is really what keeps me going and keeps me accountable for what I'm working on.
Great. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Great. Okay, so we have a question from James Phillips. James, do you want to unmute and ask your question, or do you want me to read it?
I'll ask. So
Okay.
The word customer popped up on your slides a lot, and I was just wondering, to what extent do you encourage direct customer interactions with the developers versus trying to route things through the product owner?
So none. So the team really shouldn't be communicating with the customer. It should be always moderated through the Scrum Master and product owner. And that doesn't mean they can't ever speak to the customer. It just means that the Scrum Master and the product owner need to be in the loop. And the whole point of this is to shield the team from the whims of the customer, right? So the idea is to have the product owner filter the customer's requests and whims and get them into a form that the team can easily understand and not be distracted from their day-to-day work, right? So the whole goal is to shield the team from interruptions.
So what if the team just needs clarification from something? Can they go track down the customer that actually wants that and knows what they want? Or do they get to play telephone?
I think they should work with the Scrum Master to go and talk to that customer if they need to, right? It's not that it's a complete no, but it's a keep people in the loop, because once you do that one time, what's going to happen the next time the customer needs something, they know Bob and they go ask Bob for that thing that they need. And that can really disrupt your sprint. And so what you really want to do is get people used to the channeling through those, not because it's like a hierarchy, but because it's a protection mechanism for your team and keeping your team efficient. And yeah, that efficiency can cut both ways, but I have definitely seen it where the customers get too comfortable with certain developers and they always want to ask those developers for things. And they're like, well, it was a little thing and I did it. It's like, but you didn't get your other things done because you were messing around with what they told you to do, right? And so it's really critical to this process that the communication's funneled the way that it is.
Okay.
Great. So our next question is from Christina Reimer. Christina, do you want to unmute and ask your question, or would you like me to ask it?
I mean, I think it's pretty straightforward, but yeah, like what do you do? Yeah, when there are tasks that no one particularly wants to do. And I guess we've experienced this for a couple of reasons. But like the main one is that it's just, for some reason, it's an unpleasant task, or maybe it's not clearly defined. And no one's like wanting to do it. Like, do you then encourage certain people to take it, or how do you handle that?
So I have a few tricks for that. if we have a sprint goal and it has an unpleasant task that feeds that goal, all the tasks that feed the goal have to be taken before more fun tasks can be taken. So we'll fill in our sprint backlog with hobbies or things people want to get ahead on. But if something's particularly unpleasant, we'll mark it as critical to the sprint, and then people can't take any of the other tasks before those are picked up. So somebody has to own it. And I've always had that work pretty well for me. Every once in a while, I will make some suggestions about who might find such a task interesting or edifying, but I would not assign one. So that's kind of my take.
Okay, great. So next we have Pamela Baker. Pamela, do you want to unmute and ask, or would you like me to ask?
Hi. Yeah, this might have already been covered when you were talking about changing in Scrum goals, but we often get a lot of scope creep for some of our tickets. We run 2-week scrums and or 2-week sprints, and sometimes we'll get, scientists will come in a week into a sprint and say, oh, we want to change up the requirements, or, we need you to do this on a much shortened timeline. And so I guess, how do you handle changes to requirements like that, like mid-sprint?
So my line is, I will be glad to do that for you in the next sprint. Or if it is important enough, I will cancel a sprint and start that sprint, start the next sprint early to accommodate the changes. And so the Scrum Master particularly has to be very good at protecting the team. That's their main job. And when you allow that scope creep, if you allow the customer to come in and meddle after you've planned, then you're sending a message to the team that the planning wasn't worth their time. And so if this is happening to you routinely, you might need to shorten a sprint, which sounds terrible when you're already on a 2-week sprint. So, you need to think about, like, what's driving this? Is it something I could have anticipated? And the Scrum Master really does have to practice saying no.
Thanks.
Okay, next we have Alicia Kim. Alicia, do you want to unmute?
Sure. Hi, Angela. So thank you for the talk. Really interesting. I'm curious from the PI's perspective in practice, the typical sprint planning meeting and the weekly tea time meetings, how long do you normally have those? And how do you structure it so that it sort of discussions just doesn't keep going?
So I have a lot of tricks. So my sprint planning meetings are 2 hours, and we start with a discussion of what our sprint goals are going to be, and a lot of times that conversation can take longer than anything else. Facilitating the meeting, so the Scrum Master really has to facilitate the meetings, and they have to be very good about helping people with their time. I have all kinds of techniques, like if people are talking too much, I'll break out an object that they have to hold if they're talking, and then they have to pass it, or I'll break out a timer, or any number of things to try to keep people on track. But it's the Scrum Master's job to facilitate the meeting, right? So we'll start by setting goals. Then we quietly write our tasks on sticky notes once the goals are set. And then everybody writes all the tasks that they think should happen in this sprint on sticky notes. And then that keeps conversation way down, because they have to quietly think for 5-10 minutes to write all the tasks down. And then we stick them up on a whiteboard, find all the duplicates, remove those, and then we categorize the stickies in the tasks into small, medium, and large, basically. Or, hey, this is already done, or this is way too big. We have a category called "You Must Be Kidding," and so by doing that, it really minimizes some of the conversation, and it gets us to consensus a little faster. And then, was there another part to your question? I'm sorry.
Oh, the tea time. How long is that meeting normally?
An hour. We do an hour.
Okay.
And, people can come and go. Sometimes people can't make it at all, and it's not a required meeting, but it's a great place to come chit chat, you know, hang out with people and get some things done. In my team, it's people hate reviewing pull requests, so it's a good time for you to snag your colleagues and make them do a pull request review.
Oh, okay, great, thank you.
Yeah. Excellent, great. So at this point, I'm going to launch a poll. If everybody could fill it out, we'll continue the discussion. But as you're listening or asking questions, feel free to answer the poll. Just a few quick questions for us. So James Douglas wants to know, who decides who is a member of a project team?
Who decides? That's hard, right? That's a collaborative decision, at least in my organization, between the person, the individual contributor, and the PI, right? So in my organization, people can volunteer to be on teams, but PIs have to agree, right? Sometimes there can be some line management involvement too. I'm not sure if I'm getting the gist of that question.
James, do you want to clarify?
Yeah, sure. So in Scrum and a lot of Agile methodologies, we often talk about self-organizing teams, which makes a lot of sense when it comes to assigning issues or taking on issues or tasks in the midst of a sprint. But then I was curious if in your experience that had also applied to the formation of the team itself. And it sounds like maybe sometimes.
It does sometimes. It depends on the project, right? Sometimes managers assign people to teams. That happens, but a lot of times things develop pretty organically here, and I can only speak for my workplace. But for us, a lot of times a project will start up and there might be a call for interest, like who really wants to do this, right? And so we'll get a chance to go back and forth a little, but I think it's some mix of both. And really the PI has a pretty significant say in that.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Great. I'll mention that I also posted in the chat a link to a Google form. So if you have kind of more free form feedback or questions about the seminar, you can put that in there. Or if you know of if you have a good talk you'd like to give or know of a good one, you can put that in there as well. And I've also included a link to the USRSC webpage if you would like to join and you are not already a member. Let's see, so next we have Jessica Jones. Jessica, do you want to ask your question? Okay, so let's see. So Jessica is asking, with part-time members, how do you handle competing priorities? For example, if something urgent comes up for a team member's other project during a sprint?
So one of the things that's really strong about Scrum is that people can come and go for teams. And we have a few specialists who do come and go from our teams. So what I ask for my team members is that they can commit to being present for whatever amount of time for each sprint. And sometimes it can change. I have people who are in high demand and I might get them 40% one sprint and 20% the next sprint, or not at all the next sprint. And that's okay with me. It's a matter of getting a commitment for somebody for a certain amount of time so that you can feel comfortable that having them involved is going to be beneficial for everyone. Now, sometimes things come up, people get sick, things happen. And so we're not inflexible. The whole point of this is to be flexible. But the basic idea is to get people to commit to how much time they have in each sprint at the beginning of the sprint and stick with it. And I understand that can be hard and quite idealistic. So I'm not saying that is 100%, but that largely works for me and my teams.
Thank you. So Nicholas is no longer here, but Nicholas DeGrosso asked, have you arranged a team within a research group? What are you changing about your organization structure in order to create a team-centered group? You may have already touched on this with the earlier question about how do you decide who's a member of the team?
Team within a research group. So Our layout is, my background is not academia. I am national lab, and we have many research groups, and most of my teams actually cut across research groups. We do have some that are within a single group. That the main thing to remember is what roles and responsibilities each person has, right? The PI has responsibility for technical matters, and they have, I think, a moral responsibility, but not an official responsibility necessarily for the human resources side of people management, right? And so there's a manager probably in the mix who's doing things like performance reviews and approvals and things like that. And so just being sure to keep roles really clear for people, and making sure that you know what you're responsible for and I know what I'm responsible for, and how do all those puzzle pieces fit together. And so there's a lot of communication that is required as a PI or as the team leader of such a team to make sure that everybody keeps on the same page about, people's priorities and how to share and how to execute all together.
Thank you. So next we have Jordan Persauer. I think you asked both your questions already, so you're all set, correct?
Well, this is a different one.
Oh, this is a different one. Okay, go ahead.
Voices. But so maybe I missed it, but are you typically managing like research goals through the Scrum method here, or is it mostly software engineering goals, or are they mixed?
It's research. So I lead a team that does remap, interface reconstruction, basically numerical methods, and we develop and deploy software that implements those methods. So my team publishes papers. We had several papers last year, and we also deliver the software that goes with those methods. And so the crosscut is really interesting. We have everything from applied mathematicians, we have engineers, we have software engineers, we have computer scientists, we have the whole crosscut. And so it is really a research team delivering a software product. That is what my teams tend to do. And so I guess what you might be getting at is how do you manage research in such a environment? Is that the question?
Well, I guess I was just wondering what kind of tasks are on your backlog. Are they mostly software tasks, or are they research goals? And you've answered the question. I think that it's a mix of both.
It's both.
It's very interesting.
And so the way that we work it is, if we know we're going to develop a new method, a new numerical method, we do the research 2 or 3 sprints before we plan to implement it. And so we always have research goals in the hopper, and we don't expect them to pan out in this sprint. And then we do them once they're ready, right? And so we always have 2 or 3 research goals rolling. Like, we need to learn this method, we need to extend that method, we need to fix the error on this thing or whatever. And then we get to implement them once we believe that we have a good handle on what it means. And so that is actually a really good question.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
This is a good question. The next one we have is from John Klein. John, do you want to unmute and ask?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, with regard to those sprints, do you run them continuously back to back, or do you ever take a break between sprints and give people a week off to do other things, catch up on other things, or is it just sprint, then sprint, then sprint?
So they're pretty much back to back, but I do try to get people to pace themselves, right? Like I said, people can come and go from sprints. Sometimes we do have a few days off between sprints. I've got one team right now who's getting a week off just because of scheduling conflicts, and we're trying to get everybody later next week, right? It's not usual for us. We usually go back to back pretty close. And it's because if you don't do that, it's easy to fall out of the habit. And so the goal is to get people to work at a sustainable pace, to commit to what they really can do, and not to feel pressured, right? So part of the idea of Scrum is to pressure people to deliver things in a certain time. And we want some of that pressure, but not too much of it. We want to be really careful with how much pressure we're applying to already busy people. And so a lot of the things that I do are around telling people, hey, let's pace ourselves. Please don't overcommit, right? If you finish your tasks in a sprint, pick up more tasks, but don't take so many that you can't possibly finish them. And that's an ideal, right? Not everybody finishes everything every time. I will tell you that. But the idea is to get a plan and keep a plan going.
Thank you.
Okay. Our next question is from Aristana Skortas. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. So in my team, we have like multiple projects, like grant funded projects that a lot of the same team members work on. So we've had a lot of discussion recently of having like one backlog to rule all projects and doing everything together versus having multiple backlogs and multiple sprints. So I was wondering, do you recommend one big sprint that covers all the projects with the team members or multiple sprints like per project?
It depends on the size of the project. So to me, the ideal size of a team is no bigger than 9.
Mm-hmm.
And if projects are very different, probably managing them separately is correct. But there is a concept called team of teams, which is a little beyond what we're talking about here.
Okay.
But I encourage you to read a little bit more about how to run team of teams or scrum of scrums. And that's really important because you can have 3 scrum teams and then have one person from each of those scrum teams form the next level team. And so that way they communicate about all the way across like a really big project, right? And then there's a separate management structure for that little team. And that can be a lot of overhead, but if you have a big project, it can really be invaluable. And on some really large projects I've worked on, that has been very effective. And so it reduces the burden for the people who are completing the work to communicate across teams, right? The leaders of the individual teams can kind of take on some of that burden. So that can be really effective.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, so I had a note here at this point. Ablakim had their hand raised. Do you want to unmute and ask your question, or has your question been answered?
Hi, good evening. Well, I have a question about you mentioned this research is unpredictable. I completely agree with it. Sometimes the research can be predictable, particularly applicable sciences in education or psychology and other sector. So the agile process, managing of the agile process, is really depends on the predictability, also unpredictability of the research. Am I correct?
It does. I mean, but there are many problems on my team we don't know if we will be able to solve, And if we're setting a goal for that, the first goal is to figure out whether we think we can come up with a solution to that. And we might spend a whole sprint studying whether we think we can fix this glitch in this algorithm that we're interested in, or if we can correct the error that is plaguing this other algorithm, or whatever we're working on. And so I think there are ways, even with the unpredictable research, to box things off so that you're at least accountable. Like, I mean, everything you do, you break down into steps in your head. And I believe teams can break even these big, unpredictable tasks down into steps. And then you can make decisions based off of, what you learn in each sprint.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Great talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have a question from Adam Rubens. Adam, do you want to ask the question?
Yeah, hi, thanks for taking this a little bit late in the session. My question was just kind of regarding the differences between Scrum and Kanban, about what sort of has worked, hadn't worked for your team that way. I know that we had issues sometimes when implementing some parts of Scrum, and so we moved to the more fluid version, but I didn't know what your experiences were.
So I have tried Kanban. I haven't spent as much time with Kanban as I have with Scrum by any stretch of the imagination. For me, as a PI, as Scrum Master, as a leader of these research projects, I like having the planning time and the closeout. Like having those things, especially with people who are already scattered with a lot of commitments, is what really keeps me coming back to Scrum. Kanban is nice, but for me, I've had trouble, you know, Scrumban has been the closest, right? Where you do some of the Scrum ceremonies and you have your planning and you have your demo, and then people pull tickets and limit the work in progress. And I think that could be a really good sweet spot for me personally. But I think it's very leader dependent. I think it's organizationally dependent. I think the important thing is for people to find a system that really works for them. And for me, what really works is stopping to plan with the whole group and then checking in with the whole group in a prescribed way.
Cool, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And next we have, so in the chat, there's some interesting discussion going on. People, Jordan Parasauer asked what people's typical team sizes were and time commitments. So we have teams of 2 to 4 with 25%, 1 to 3 with 10 to 100%, 1 person 50%, 1 to 5 or 6, 25% or less.
Wow.
2 to 3, typically between 15 and 33%. 3 to 4, 25 to 50%. We'll have
That's
to
amazing.
save the chat so that we can get these stats.
Yeah, we need to do that because that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I would love to see a survey about how people have done team sizes. Yeah, that's really interesting. For us, I think we're pretty lucky to have this big organization with some fairly sizable projects. And I think this is educational for me to see how other people are working.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll mention that I think Angela and I are happy to stay on a little bit longer, but it is just about 5:15. So if people have to drop off, you're very welcome to, but I think we'll keep answering questions. Does that sound good, Angela?
That sounds fine. Yeah, I'm glad to hang out and talk to people. I'm also glad to accept emails. I'll have Lauren send out, contact information, and I have a little write-up or two that I can send also with it for people who are interested.
Yeah, I think people will definitely be interested. I know there were a number of people that reached out and asked me if there was going to be a recording because they couldn't make it. So, yeah. Let's see. So the next question in the chat is from Matthew Garcia. And Pat, if you want to type your question in the chat, then I can add you to the queue.
Hey, thanks for your presentation, Angela.
Sure.
My question has to do with, do you use in your sprint planning meeting, do you translate that whiteboard with sticky notes into any sort of software in order to keep track of?
Jira.
What's that?
Jira. We use Jira.
Jira, okay. And you can use that to keep track of dependencies and keep track of that all the way through the sprint. Is that how you do that?
Correct.
Okay.
And so Jira is invaluable. So, I did, when I had a team that was co-located in a physical space, we used a physical whiteboard with sticky notes on it. And that was a terrible experience because the stickies would fall off the wall and they would get lost and stepped on, and it was not pretty. So Jira is the way to go, or something similar.
But you try to start with everybody in the room, and then you translate all that to software.
Yeah, it doesn't take, 15 or 20 minutes generally, because I don't put a lot of details in tickets.
Gotcha. Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Megan Lerman has the next question. Megan, do you want to ask?
Hi, yeah. So my question was more pertaining to achieving like long-term goals, and if you use increments or if you've seen increments implemented successfully, or if you have another method that you use for doing that.
Can you explain a little more? What do you mean by increments in this context?
Yeah, so in other roles that I've been in, we've used increments, which are usually kind of like larger versions of sprints that are made up of made up of 6 sprints inside of them. So you have like an increment planning, and then you have your 6 sprints, and then you also have an increment like retrospective. And so that's for achieving like the longer term goals over like 3-month periods.
That's really interesting. We don't. So our main increment is 1 year. So for us, our project planning is 1 year. And for that 1 year, we are working towards the same goal, generally.
Okay.
They can change in the year. They don't often. And so we have some stability with what we have planned to do. And so we're able to run however many sprints we can fit in a year. And but we do keep at every sprint, we come back to what are our yearly goals.
Okay.
So that we can make sure we actually we said.
Do you ever feel like there's a need to break down those yearly goals into like smaller, more achievable gaps, or smaller, more achievable like bites?
We break them down pretty small, right? So we might have 10 goals for the year, and so those are pretty bite-sized. They might be to finish a certain algorithm, to put that algorithm in an existing code. Then it might be to ship a new library with that algorithm in it, right? So we have we're already pretty bite-sized with that. And when I say bite-sized, it's 2 or 3 month bites. So we usually, that year-long planning is usually broken down pretty well for me anyway.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I was just wondering if the like increment model has been implemented, or if you'd seen that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, next we have a question from Tracy Stevens. Tracy, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. Hey, Angela. So I'm a Scrum Master at NRail in Golden, Colorado. And I had put that, I liked your overview of Scrum and how you're choosing to kind of take the parts that are best suited to you. My question was, how did you decide to use Scrum, or that you were going to find it useful for your day-to-day work? And then how did you convince others that you're working with to want to work in this framework as well?
So that's a little tricky. So I started on a project that was already using Scrum, and they were, in fact, my very first project, they were using Scrum of Scrums. And so they were already well established before I came in. I did this as a pretty junior staff. It's now been 12 years or 13 since I started with that team. And I learned the ropes from there, and I saw what was useful and I saw what wasn't. And I learned from people who were very pragmatic about it. Over time, I became involved with many other teams, and I kind of developed my own style. And because I do mix the roles, if I'm PIing a project, I get to pick. And I've certainly been Scrum Master on a project where I'm not a PI, but definitely for the last 6 or 7 years, I've always been the PI on my project, so I have the latitude to do it. That's not to say it isn't hard. Convincing people to do things in this different way can be tricky. I always, when I'm going in, I talk to them about how the process is really for them, because it is, and how we can change the process if it's not working for them. So I try to allay fears, and I try to work with people. And the truth is, it's not for everyone. Not everybody likes the cadence and the little bit of pressure that comes from working this way. But I have found that 90% of my colleagues, if they're willing to give it a try, will come around to this way of doing things. But I'm not trying to spread it really beyond myself, except in the context where it helps other people do what they need to do.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think next is Pat. I think, Pat, you have a similar question, but maybe a little bit more specific.
Yeah, so I have a a team I inherited really, but I've been on it. I was on it for a while and now I'm the PI, and I'd like to do this because we do have, well, one, it's a small team. So one developer in particular takes a lot of time to get things done. And I think a sprint would be helpful, but I don't know how to start with it. You know, we've been using a Kanban, but not everybody refers to it. And I feel like I'm the one putting it on there. So I'm driving it. I mean, I let them pick what they want to work on. So that part of it is good. I just don't know where to start.
I think you start. So my feeling with starting a new team is that it takes 3 sprints to get a team formed and kind of on board with this. And so the first time you're going to mess up, but this is a beautiful process. It's iterative, right? If you mess up the first sprint, so what? Everybody can rail at you in the retrospective, and then you can talk about how to fix it. And so I think you have to go for it. You know, you're the PI. You can just say, hey, we're going to try it. If you guys try it for 3 sprints, you know, then, and you still absolutely hate it, we can't figure out how to fix it, we'll do something else, right? That's kind of the deals that I tend to cut with my teams if I'm in a position of needing to bargain. Is let's just try it and let's see where we get. And I suspect that your way of doing it will look different than my way, and that's great, because that's the whole reason that, you know, this works, is because it fits my personality and how I need to report and how I need to manage things.
Which, so you had some slides that I think were real good for this. I mean, like you have yearly planning, you have planning. I wouldn't know where to start, I guess, with the 4 key items or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Defining the sprint.
You want me to, I mean, we can talk offline on this one.
Yeah, I'll just email you.
Yep. And anyone else is free to too. I just know Pat's here at Los Alamos with me. I'll be glad to talk to anybody who wants to talk more offline.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Pat.
Excellent. Aristotta's mentioning that their team uses Miro for virtual whiteboarding and sticky note brainstorming, and that it's very helpful. I haven't seen that one. MIRO.
Huh. That's great to know.
Yeah.